but my information will be at the end. So if you guys have any that are either unrelated or you want to ask in private, you can just reach out to me personally. But welcome to Township Tuesday. My name is Maddie Cash. I'm an attorney with the Association of Townships. If you guys want us to cover, please let Graham or I know so we can do that. Otherwise, we just give you recent legislation, topics that maybe we're getting a lot of questions about, or topics that haven't been covered in a while and we want to just make sure are on the forefront of everyone's mind. So today I will be talking about Township Tuesday, about cannabis and drug testing, what the new cannabis law means for drug testing. So that's what I will cover. But the agenda this morning, updates within the organization, and then I'll also cover some updates that we've received from the Office of Cannabis Management. And then I'll cover what authorized testing looks like, when you can do random testing, when you can do testing if there's reasonable suspicion, what is specific to cannabis testing, what written policies should look like, notice of testing in those written policies, cost of those tests, and then labs that you can use to do those tests. And then at the end, I'll cover some employee and employer protections that are just generally outlined in the law. So first, I'll start with MAT updates. So first, speaking of cannabis, so under the cannabis law, townships have a authority to register retailers within their jurisdiction. That includes compliance checks, so similar to underage drinking tests where you send in somebody who is not 21 years of age and see if they sell to that patron or not. If you don't want to deal with these registrations or the compliance checks, we have the ability to designate that retail registration authority to the county. We've created a resolution for that. The law doesn't specify how that needs to be done. So some counties are doing it by joint powers agreements. If you do choose to go that route, make sure you have your town attorney take a look at the joint powers agreement, make sure that you're not taking on any liability in that, or there would be other concerns. So make sure you have somebody else get a set of eyes on that joint powers agreement if you do choose to do that. Designating retail registration authority, if you choose to do that, you can still maintain your zoning authority. So you can still put certain restrictions on cannabis businesses if the county hasn't done so already, right? If you want to be more restrictive with their buffers, for example, how far away they can be from a school or things along those lines, you can still do that. This retail registration authority is solely for registering. It's about 3 of the many, many licenses that are available under cannabis businesses. So it's not that many, and there's even a limit on these retailers within the jurisdiction typically, or you can set a limit. Almost all counties, townships have done that or have chosen to do that. So there won't be too many of these to deal with, but just so you're aware of that new requirement, new action you got to take otherwise, unless you want to send it to the county. If the county takes care of our zoning, do we need to do anything about the retail registration? Yes. So they are 2 separate things. So if you don't want to deal with the retail registration, we have that resolution that you just want to pass, let the county know, hey, we're washing our hands of this, you take it on if you want to, and then let the Office of Cannabis Management know. Now, the Office of Cannabis Management is working on a program where you can just kind of fill out a form on their website and say, yes, we designated retail registration authority to the county, and yes, we designated all cannabis zoning to the county. So we don't, or you don't need to actively designate. Sorry, I misspoke there. We don't have zoning authority of these cannabis businesses within the township. So just take a look at the county zoning ordinance for that. but they're not complete with that. So that's not available yet. So you just want to let the Office of Cannabis Management know that you did do that so that they're not bugging you for these retail registrations. And none of those have been released yet because the rules aren't out and they can't issue licenses until those rules are out. So, okay, enough about retail registration. The annual conference is coming up here. It's on December 13th and 14th in St. Cloud. It's a really great opportunity to get to know about updates in recent legislation, get some more training, and then there's going to be vendors there as well that you can speak to, other township officers. It's a great opportunity to bounce ideas off each other and get to know each other. And then the annual meeting where we will cover the audit and then the resolutions from the LNR day. So. And then the final thing I want to cover today is I'm working on a cost participation policy update with MnDOT. If you're not familiar with cost participation, it's basically a program that MnDOT has where townships and cities and counties in certain circumstances have to participate to MnDOT projects if they are contributing to that township or city or county. If you have experience with these cost participation agreements, please let me know. I haven't heard from many townships who have had an experience with these. So I just want to know if anybody is aware of what that looks like, what that process looks like, how it's been for you, what that experience was like, so that I can go into it with more information. So let me know if you have experience with that or know of someone who has experience with that. I'd really love that information. All right, and then I covered this a little bit, but Office of Cannabis Management is working on a process for townships to kind of let them know what they're taking on as far as regulation goes, and so they know who to contact in terms of zoning or retail registration. So once that is available, I will let you guys know. Cost participation, is that the mining effects money we get? Sorry, Pat, I'm confused by the question. Is that the mining effects money we get? No. Oh, no, sorry. That's, it's solely if you've had road projects in your town that are started by MnDOT or required by MnDOT, and then they come back to you and say, hey, you need to participate in this project because it's improving your town. So if you've had experience with that specifically, that's what I'm talking about here. All right, the Office of Cannabis Management is still working on the rules, like I said, that will cover, yeah. So Pat said mining affects the money we get from the mines to keep us from having to annex into the city. Yeah, this is a separate issue. They don't, oh, my lights turned off. They don't dive into that in the participation policy. So anyways, rules. The rules for this new cannabis law will be coming out in early 2025. That will cover what security is going to look like for these establishments, what kind of noise pollution, smell pollution, sound pollution they can output, those kinds of things. So we don't know what those look like yet. So we are creating a cannabis document, but these rules are ever changing. They are constantly shifting. So we've had to revamp it quite a few times. And we just want to make sure we get you guys the most accurate information. So hopefully that will be out as soon as possible, but it's difficult when these rules are just not set in stone and not everybody, we don't want to put information out there that's not accurate. So that should be coming shortly. All right, so today, as an overview, I'll talk about the recreational cannabis and drug and alcohol testing in the workplace, and because it's become a hot topic, and this is kind of one niche subject of that we have not covered yet. So this presentation, I'll offer an introduction, an overview of the drug testing laws and what that looks like. But as a general rule, the townships that are considering adopting a drug testing policy should work with their town attorney to do so, to make sure that it has all the right language in there and is accurate. So the Minnesota legislature passed a Minnesota Drug and Alcohol Testing in the Workplace Act in 1987. It's been updated quite a bit, 4 times, and most recently in 2023, or 2024 now. So the act permits drug testing for cannabis and other drugs, alcohol, and only under certain circumstances. It provides some protections for employees, and for notice and for scientific standards for what those drug testing look like. So what is authorizing us to do this cannabis testing? So Minnesota Statute 181.951 says that employers are prohibited from requesting or requiring employees or applicants to undergo drug and alcohol testing unless they are authorized by statutes. So unless a state or federal law allows them to do so, they can't. The statute establishes exclusive framework for drug testing by employees. So you have to follow steps A, B, and C in order to do drug testing. It also requires that the employers only conduct drug testing under a written policy and use properly accredited laboratories to conduct that testing if they choose to take action on it. So if you want to have this policy, you want to act on these things, you have to have a policy in writing in order to do so. So keep that in mind as we're going through. And of course, it restricts employees from drug testing in a manner that is arbitrary and capricious, which basically means there's no reason for it. Oh, flew away from me. Okay. Random drug testing. When can we do random drug testing? So it's prohibited unless, in most circumstances, so you can't just randomly drug test people unless they are employed in a safety sensitive position, which is defined in Minnesota Statute 181.951, or they are a professional athlete. I'm not aware of any professional athletes that are hired by townships, but you never know. But that's probably one you don't need to pay attention to. Safety sensitive positions are jobs that include any supervisor or managerial position where an impairment could affect health, safety, or welfare of any person in that job. So anytime someone is operating dangerous machinery or things along those lines, that's likely a safety sensitive position where you can conduct random drug testing. Oh my goodness, why does it keep doing that? It's giving away all my secrets. Okay, random drug testing is prohibited. Oops. Reasonable suspicion drug testing. The act allows for an employer to require reasonable suspicion testing if the employee meets certain criteria, or they have reasonable suspicion that the employee meets certain criteria. So this is covered in Minnesota Statute 181.951. And those criteria include if the person is, there's reasonable suspicion that the person is under the influence of said drugs or alcohol. They have violated the written work rules related to drugs or alcohol or cannabis. I'll get to those in a minute. They have sustained a personal injury or have caused somebody else to sustain a personal injury in the workplace, or they have caused another work-related accident. Reasonable suspicion is what it sounds like, right? It means a belief based on specific facts or rationale. So if you have reasons to consider why this person might be under the influence, that's when that kicks in. All right, cannabis testing. The adult cannabis law provides certain protections for employees if they use cannabis away from work because of this new Adult Use Cannabis Act, or if they're enrolled in the medical cannabis registry program. There's exceptions to those protections, of course, including if that employee is in a safety-sensitive position or if cannabis use impairs their performance or poses a risk. It could potentially lead to disciplinary action. Again, that would have to be in your written rules. Cannabis testing specifically has been further limited by the legislature in an interesting way. The law provides that unless the township is otherwise required to do so by state or federal law, they cannot request a job applicant to undergo pre-employment cannabis-specific testing or refuse to hire an applicant solely because of a positive test based on cannabis during a authorized pre-employment test. Townships may also not request employees to undergo cannabis testing on an arbitrary capricious basis, right? I covered that. So if you want to go do any of these, you need a written policy. And I'll cover what that must look like. So the Act forbids testing except under a written policy. If you want to implement a written policy, the township must include this information here on the screen. So it must include the employees that are subject to the testing, including applicants, the circumstances under which a test must be taken. It has to advise the employee or applicant that they have a right to refuse and identify the consequences of refusal and what that looks like. It must outline the consequences of any action based on a positive test or a confirmatory test. And it must advise the employee that they have a right to explain a positive test result. It must also advise the employee that they have the right to request or pay for a retest, which is a confirmatory test. And then any other appeal procedures that the township puts in there as available to them. Cannabis has its own kind of special detail as well that requires work rules. So the statute states that an employer may only enact and enforce written work rules prohibiting cannabis flower, cannabis product, basically any cannabis product while an employee is working or while an employee is on the premises. So consumption, use, possession, impairment, sale, or transfer. And that's if they have written work rules. So if they refuse to test, can we terminate? It depends on if they are an employee or not. So if they are an employee already, if they refuse to test. So potentially, if you have a reason to believe that they have been under the influence of drugs or alcohol while at work, and they have been required to submit to these tests. If they refuse, then you can potentially terminate. Yep. Okay, sorry, work-related rules. I will talk about those in these next slides. So what do the work rules need to state? So unless federal or state law says otherwise, an employee can prohibit. Yes, it all needs to be in writing. Thanks, Pat. Anything needs to be in writing. So that's why I say potentially you could terminate, because it needs to specify in what circumstances a person would be terminated or receive disciplinary action and what that looks like. So it all depends on what your written policy looks like. But these cannabis work rules are different from written policy, because the policy is on what can we test you, when can we test you for drugs or alcohol, and then the work rules are you can further restrict cannabis if you have these work rules by not allowing people to possess cannabis products on the company premises or sell or transfer, all that kind of thing, these kinds of things that I'm about to discuss. So the work rules can include the use or possession of cannabis flower products while an employee is on the job, on company premises, or operating vehicles, any impairment from these substances while an employee is working on the company premises or operating vehicles, and the sale or transfer of these substances while an employee is on the premises. So that's what the work rules can contain for cannabis-specific policies. All right, notice of the policy. Beyond outlining the policy's contents, the township must communicate the policy to employees through specific methods. So the employees need to know that this policy exists, right? They have to be provided with written notice of when a policy is adopted or upon hire. And then if they change positions and they're now newly affected, let's say they're switching to a safety sensitive position and now they will be affected by your cannabis policy, then you want to let them know, or cannabis and alcohol policy, if you have that, to a job applicant upon hire, if the offer is contingent upon that, right, if it's a safety sensitive position. And then an employer shall also post notice where you post all of your work notices in an appropriate and conspicuous location on the employer's premises. Oh, it's running away from me again. Okay, testing costs, what that's going to look like. So who's paying for this? The township should pay for the cost of all drug and alcohol or cannabis testing requested if it is required by the job applicant or employees, except for confirmatory retests, which wouldn't be required. That's something that the employee and applicant can ask for if they would like a retest. So if the initial test wasn't accredited by a proper laboratory, if it was just an oral or fluid test that indicates positive, and the employee says, well, I'd like a retest, then you have to submit it to a laboratory before you can have them pay for it. So it has to be laboratory tested before the applicant pays for the retest. If it's not required, if it's retest, then the job applicant or employees are responsible for paying the costs associated with that. So what does an accredited laboratory look like? Oh my goodness. This is crazy. Okay. So if it is cannabis, then it can be one of these three. So certified by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, accredited by the College of American Pathologists, or licensed to test for drugs by the State of New York Department of Health. I don't know why that is one of them, but it is. And if it's alcohol, it's just the 2 or 3. So the first one doesn't cover alcohol, but for cannabis, it can be one of the 3. All right, employee protections. You can't discharge someone from a first positive test unless you first offer them counseling or rehab. If the employee then fails to complete that rehab or refuses to go to rehab, then that person can be discharged. If there's no statute that says the employer pays for the rehab. That would be at the expense of either their insurance or the employee. But if the employee does go through this rehab, let's say, and they come back to work, you allow them to come back to work, then they fail a test again, then you can discharge them. So it's kind of like you get a second chance and then you can discharge them on that second term. Also, employees get the right to request a confirmatory test at their own expense. if they think that was a incorrect test or whatever it may be, they can take a second test at their own cost. They have a right to see a copy of the report. And if employees test positive, they must be given written notice of the right to explain the positive test. And then as far as employer protections, there's really not many, other than the fact that the statute says an employee does not have the duty to request or require an employee or job applicant to undergo drug and alcohol testing. And that just basically protects employers from liability, in theory, because this has not been tested in the court system at all. So we don't really know what that looks like in terms of how that's going to play out in court. So you're not required to test for drug and alcohol, but if they're operating dangerous machinery, it's probably a good idea to ensure that those people are doing so unimpaired. But yes, that is all I have in terms of updates and on the cannabis information. If you have any questions, here's my information. Give me a call or email me. Otherwise, I can take questions now if anybody has them.
Hey, Maddie, Reno here.
Hi, Reno.
How's it going today for you guys down there?
It's pretty rainy.
Yeah, same thing here. Maddie, my
Yeah.
question is, as you're working on that document for Matt, uh, can you also look at the possibilities of putting in kind of like a sample policy that townships, could take a look at? And I know they got to work with their own attorney on it, but it would just be nice to kind of give a formatting of the things you highlighted today for them to kind of watch out for.
Of course, yeah. So I have a section on drug testing in the document. Are you interested in like a work rules policy or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
because everything that you mentioned today is governed by federal and state law. And
Mm-hmm.
if townships wanted to do something, they can't do anything unless they have a written policy. So, what
Mm-hmm.
does a written policy really mean for a township? That's what I'm kind of
Yeah.
thinking of if you guys could put something together.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd be
Thank
happy to
you.
do that.
Thank you very much, Maddie.
Yep. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. I hope you have sunnier weather in your neck of the woods. And I hope you have a wonderful week. And I'll see you in a few weeks.
Thanks, Maddie.
Goodbye. Thank you.